Good evening for night 3 of our reading of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. This is a Christmas Carol in prose, being a ghost story of Christmas by Charles Dickens, with 4 illustrations in color and 4 woodcuts by John Leech, a facsimile of the original edition, with an introduction by J.K. Chesterton and a preface by B.W. Metz, London, Cecil Palmer, Oakley House, Bloomsbury Street, WC1. If you are just joining us, please go back and watch the first 2 videos that I made. Every night until December 25th, I will be reading part of the staves. I believe there's 5 staves or 5 chapters of A Christmas Carol. And these will be split up into 6 pages or 6.5 pages per night until we reach Christmas. So as the first, I will backtrack a little bit though. The very first video, if you have not seen it, I did read up until page 18. So I overread that very first video. So we will be finishing off Stave 1 tonight, which only has about 3 or 4 pages left. And then we will be beginning Stave 2 tomorrow night. So I will fill up some of this video with some fast facts about A Christmas Carol and Charles Dickens right now. So if you are not interested, please skip ahead in the video to when I pick up this book again. And then you will be able to follow along with the rest of the story. The Cratchit family in A Christmas Carol is actually based on Charles Dickens' own family. Tiny Tim is actually inspired by Charles Dickens' nephew. And for inspiration for A Christmas Carol, his own childhood experience with his father's debt and observations of the wage gap between the rich and the poor largely influenced the story of A Christmas Carol. The holiday spirit in the book, not specific to the actual spirits that are characters in the book, but the overall arcing theme, I guess, was that it helped popularize the modern celebration that we have today, known as Christmas or known as the holiday season. And the phrase Merry Christmas, which Dickens uses throughout the story, is actually basically thanks to Mr. Dickens. And A Christmas Carol, most people, I guess, yes, they would have said a Merry Christmas or a Happy Christmas. But Merry Christmas really wasn't used until this book came out. And it became more popular, similar to how we use movie quotes or book quotes in our local colloquialisms. Financial motivations. Dickens was actually under financial pressure to write a successful book after his recent novel Before A Christmas Carol flopped. And the social commentary in the book is in response to the poverty and the social inequality at the time, which we mentioned before. So Dickens, being the philanthropist that he was, and he was a well-known philanthropist, he actually used the book to his advantage and aimed to open the hearts and pocketbooks of the prosperous to the plight of the poor. So after visiting a working house over the Christmas season, I believe it was in October that he was actually a part of an event at a working house, and he ended up becoming inspired to write A Christmas Carol thereafter, and actually released it just a little over a month after he was a part of that event. So good for him for following up on his NaNoWriMo. If you don't know what that is, that's National Novel Writing Month, which is typically in November. Though that wasn't a thing way back when, of course. But basically, in December of 1843, he released A Christmas Carol, and it was an instant success, and especially in tuned with the holiday season and the holiday vibe everybody was going for. So we have a lot to thank Mr. Charles Dickens for. If you were actually interested, though, Charles Dickens didn't just write A Christmas Carol. He actually wrote several books about Christmas. That being, there's, of course, what we are reading today. But he also read The Chimes. He also made Cricket on the Hearth, The Battle of Life, The Haunted Man and Ghost, and Bargain, and other stories about Christmas. So he was very inspired by this season of giving and sharing, and probably a little bit inspired by his own success with the very first story. However, these other stories are lesser known. I do know that there's also a little bit to be said for his book Oliver Twist and A Little Match Girl, of how they are in the winter season, or at least scenes of them are depicted in the winter season. So maybe not typical Christmas stories there, but definitely along the same themes. Now, A Christmas Carol actually began as a social manifesto, which basically means that it was published for the mass public population that had the money to spare. Unlike Ebenezer Scrooge, Charles Dickens was a champion of the poor, as we said. But this was literally to popularize it to the modern masses that were more well off, in order to shed light on that subject. He had a different name in mind for Tiny Tim. The first 2 pages where the character is introduced, he crossed out Fred and substituted Tim, or Tiny Tim. And later he gave the name Fred, which is also the name of his younger brother, to Ebenezer Scrooge's genial nephew. The one who wishes Scrooge a Merry Christmas, Uncle, in the first telling of our first Stave. So episode 1, if you want to go back and watch that. Yeah, I think without further ado, we'll begin the last bit of the first Stave, and we will continue on. So I will reread the last little bit of what I read last night so that you guys can catch up. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa. A small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and the little saucepan of gruel. Scrooge had a cold in his head. Upon the hob, nobody under the bed. Nobody in the closet, and nobody in his dressing gown, which was hung up in a suspicious altitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual. Old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing stand on 3 legs. and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in, then double-locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus, secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very low fire indeed, nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it, before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago, and paved all around with quaint Dutch tiles, designed to illustrate the scriptures. There were the Cains and the Abels, Pharaoh's daughters, Queen of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air on clouds like feather beds. Abrahams, Balahazars, apostles, putting off to sea in buttered boats. Hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts, and yet that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like an ancient prophet's rod and swallowed up the whole. If each smooth tile had been a blank at first, with power to shape some picture on its surface from the disjointed fragments of his thoughts, there would have been a copy of old Marley's head on every one. "Humbug," said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell, that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw the bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the onset that it scarcely made a sound, but it soon rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute, or a minute, but it seemed like an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun altogether. They were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks of a wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His color changed, though, when without a pause it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon coming in, the dying flame leapt up as though it cried, "I know him! Marley's ghost!" and fell again. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail, and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long, and the wound about him like a tail. and it was made for Scrooge as observed it closely. Of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him, looking through the waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. There's the picture. So here is Scrooge, and there is Dear Marley. The picture is inscribed as Marley's ghost. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now. Though he looked the phantom through and through, and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before, he was still incredulous, and fought against his senses. "How? No!" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you, then?" said Scrooge, raising his voice. "You're particular, for a shade." He was going to say, "to a shade," but substituted this as more appropriate. "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. "I can." "Do it, then." Scrooge asked the question, but he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that, in the event of it being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe in me," observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge. "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart but any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart, as a means of distracting his own attention, and keeping down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. To sit Staring at those fixed, glazed eyes in silence for a moment would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce with him. There was something very awful, too, in the spectre's being provided with an infernal atmosphere of its own. Scrooge could not feel it in himself, but this was clearly the case. For though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, its hair and skirts and tassels were still agitated by the hot vapor from an oven. "You see this toothpick?" said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge, for the reason just assigned, and wishing, though it were only for a second, to divert the vision's stony gaze from himself. "I do," replied the ghost. "You're not looking at it," said Scrooge. "But I see it," said the ghost, "notwithstanding." "Well," returned Scrooge, "I have but to swallow this, and be for the rest of my days presented by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you. Humbug!" At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry, and shook its chain with such dismal and appalling noise, that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head as if it were too warm to wear indoors, a lower dropped down upon his breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. "Mercy! Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?" "Man of the worldly mind," replied the ghost, "do you believe in me or not?" "I do," said Scrooge. "I must. But why do you spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?" "It was required of every man," the ghost returned, "that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men, and travel far and wide, and if that spirit does not go forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turned to happiness." Again the spirit raised a cry, and shook its chain and wrung its shadowy hands. "You're fettered," said Scrooge, trembling. Tell me why." "I wear the chain I forged in life," replied the ghost. "I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girdled it on my own free will, and of my own free will I will wear it. Is it pattern strange to you?" Scrooge trembled more and more. "Would you know," pursued the ghost, "the weight and length of strong coil you bear yourself? It was full and as heavy as long as this 7 Christmases Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain." Scrooge glanced about him on the floor, in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. Jacob, he said imploringly. Old Jacob, Molly. Tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob. I have none to give, the ghost replied. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge. It is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men, nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest, and I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond the counting-house. Mark me. In life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of a money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. It was a habit with Scrooge, whenever he became thoughtful, to put his hands in his breeches pockets. Pondering on what the ghost had said, he did so now, but without lifting up his eyes or getting off his knees. You must have been very slow about it, Jacob, Scrooge observed in a business-man-like manner, though with humility and deference. Slow, the ghost repeated. 7 years dead, mused Scrooge. And traveling all the time. The whole time, said the ghost. No rest, no peace. Incessant torture of remorse. You travel fast, said Scrooge. On the wings of the wind, replied the ghost. You might have gone over a great quantity of ground in 7 years, said Scrooge. The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry. It clanked its chain so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicting it for nuisance. Oh, captive, bound and double-ironed, cried the phantom. Not to know that ages of incessant labor by immortal creatures for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life's opportunities misused. Yet such was I. Oh, such was I. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. Business, cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. It held up its chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of all this unavailing grief, and it flung it heavily upon the ground again. At this time of the rolling year, the spectre said, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me? Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate. and began to quake exceedingly.
"Hear me!"
cried the ghost.
"My time is nearly gone."
"I will," said Scrooge. "But don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob. Pray."
"How is it that I appear before you in a shape that you can see? I may not tell. I have sat invisible beside you many, many a day."
It was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered and wiped the perspiration from his brow. "It is no light part of my penance," pursued the ghost.
"I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. A chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer."
"You were always a good friend to me," said Scrooge. "Thank you."
"You will be haunted,"
returned the ghost,
"by 3 spirits."
Scrooge's countenance fell almost as low as the ghost's had done. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob?" he demanded in a faltering voice.
"It is."
"I think I'd rather not," said Scrooge.
"Without their visits," said the ghost, "you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1.
"Couldn't I take them all at once, and have it over, Jacob?" hinted Scrooge.
"Expect the second on the next night at the same hour, and the third upon the next night, when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us."
When it had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table and bound it around its head, as before. Scrooge knew this by the smart sound of its teeth made when the jaws were brought back together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again and found his supernatural visitor confronting him in an erect attitude, with its chain wound over about its arm. The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped. Not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear, for on the raising of the hand he became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window. Desperate in his curiosity, he looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in the restless haste, and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few, they might be guilty governments, were linked together. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He had been quite familiar with one old ghost in the white waistcoat, a monstrous iron safe attached to his ankle, who cried piteously, being unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant whom it saw below upon a doorstep. The misery with them was, clearly, that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, and had lost the power forever. Here's the picture. Marley being taken away. Whether these creatures faded into mist, or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell. But they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as if it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say, "Humbug," but stopped at the first syllable, and being from the emotion that he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant. Tomorrow we will start Stave 2, the first of the three spirits. Again, I may have overread a little. I probably could have broken that portion of Stave 1 up a little bit more, but because there were 2 photos in it, I feel like it was justified to just finish it up tonight, and we will break up the rest of the book over the next couple of days. Join us again for tomorrow night as we start Stave 2. Good night.